Look, there are truths that have been trapped for years between silence and shame. One of them is the relationship older men have with their own bodies. In our culture, talking about sexuality after 60 is still almost an act of rebellion. Many have been taught that desire fades with age, that the body loses the right to pleasure, and that all that remains is to resign oneself to the limitations of time. However, as a urologist with over 25 years of experience, I can tell you that this is nothing more than a deeply rooted myth that has caused more harm than good. I have seen intelligent, active men, full of wisdom and life experience, begin to lose vitality not because their bodies are ill, but because they stopped listening to them. They believe that caring for their sexual health is a frivolity, when in reality it is a basic necessity, as important as maintaining a balanced diet or exercising. The most concerning part is that the medical system often does not address these topics out of modesty or habit, leaving patients without the information that could change their quality of life. And so, thousands of men go through their golden years with discomfort, fatigue, insomnia, or lack of motivation, unaware that behind all of this may lie a common root, the neglect of their own sexuality. Talking about masturbation in later life is still a taboo, even among healthcare professionals. In consultations, patients usually look down or change the subject when it is mentioned. But the truth is that the male body never stops needing attention, stimulation, or care. Biology does not have an age. Hormonal processes, mental balance, and prostate health continue to depend on the same principle. Sexual activity, whether shared or individual, is part of the body's overall functioning. Denying or suppressing it is like turning off a vital energy source. The great challenge of this conversation is not medical, but cultural. Many men grew up with the idea that masculinity is measured by strength, work, or productivity, not by connection with oneself. That is why, when old age arrives, they feel confused, even guilty, when they notice that their body still seeks pleasure, contact, and tenderness. But pleasure does not disappear with the years. It simply changes form, becoming slower, more conscious, and deeper. The real problem is that no one taught them how to reconcile with this new stage of their body. That is why I want this message to be different. It is not about morality or shame, but about science, health, and humanity. The sexuality of older men is a little explored territory, full of prejudices, but also full of opportunities. Throughout my career, I have accompanied many gentlemen who regained energy, joy, and a sense of purpose by reconnecting with themselves. Today, I want to share what I have learned from them and from the medical evidence that supports it. Because even if no one has told you, your body is still alive, still speaks to you, and deserves to be listened to. For decades, medicine has treated male sexuality as a topic that disappears as a man ages. In medical training programs, the impact of sexuality on the health of older adults is barely mentioned. People talk about cholesterol, blood pressure, glucose, but almost never about desire, the need for contact, or the role self-stimulation plays in hormonal and emotional balance. And yet, scientific evidence is clear. Maintaining an active sexual life, even through masturbation, can improve circulation, strengthen the immune system, and prevent depression. So why do we continue avoiding talking about it in medical consultations? The answer, though it may seem simple, is deeply linked to social modesty. Many doctors grew up with the same prejudices as their patients. Some think that talking about pleasure with an older man could be inappropriate or out of place. Others, out of fear of offending or due to lack of time, prefer to focus on visible clinical aspects. But the human body is not divided between the physical and the emotional. Everything is connected. When a 70-year-old patient comes into a consultation saying they sleep poorly, urinate frequently, or have lost motivation, the easiest thing is to prescribe medication. The hardest thing is to look beyond and ask, when was the last time you felt pleasure? I have had colleagues who, with the best intentions, recommend vitamins or exercises without understanding that what is missing is not in the muscles or the diet, but in the connection with one's own body. Modern medicine, so advanced in technology, has sometimes forgotten the power of human contact, intimacy, and self-awareness. And this profoundly affects older men, who already carry the idea that their emotional needs must be repressed. In my experience, when a patient dares to talk about their intimate life, something changes. The conversation becomes more human. The consultation stops being a list of symptoms and becomes a space for understanding. Many men breathe a sigh of relief when they discover that they are not alone, that they are not the only ones feeling disconnected, that what is happening to them has a medical explanation and is not a sign of weakness. And that is the moment when treatment truly begins, because it is no longer only about healing an organ, but about regaining a sense of vitality. Before continuing, I would love to know something to connect with our community. From which city or country are you watching us? Write it in the comments. I love getting to know the people who truly care about their health, and this allows me to create content that is more useful and relevant for you and your region. Let's get to the point. I remember an older doctor, a colleague of mine, who once whispered to me, "I'm afraid to talk about this with my patients because I don't know how to do it without seeming intrusive." And I understood that silence is not always disinterest. Sometimes it is insecurity. Medical education rarely teaches how to talk about pleasure naturally, but this lack has consequences. Every silence in the consultation can become a man suffering alone, thinking that his body is no longer useful or that he has stopped being worthy of feeling. That is why I believe change begins with us, the doctors. Because only when we normalize this topic can we help older men live their sexual health as what it truly is, an essential part of their overall well-being. Talking about sexuality after 60 should not have to be an act of courage, yet it is. Society has created a rigid image of desire, associating it almost exclusively with youth. However, human sexuality does not disappear with gray hair, it transforms. At this stage, the body asks for a different relationship with pleasure. It is no longer just about potency or performance, but about connection, tenderness, and presence. Older men discover, if they allow themselves, that desire is not in muscles or the frequency of sexual encounters, but in the ability to feel, to imagine, and to surrender to the experience without fear or shame. In my practice, many patients arrive convinced that their sexual life ended with retirement or with the first prostate diagnosis. But what has really ended is not the ability, but the limited idea they had of themselves. Redefining sexuality means accepting that the body changes, that the skin has a different texture, that the erectile response may be different, and that this does not mean losing masculinity. On the contrary, it means expanding it. It is the moment when a man can discover a deeper, more conscious type of pleasure, less conditioned by urgency or expectation. I have seen men who, after years of silence, manage to reconnect with their bodies thanks to a new approach to desire. Some start with small gestures, by regaining physical contact with their partner, by talking about the subject without fear of ridicule. Others do it through self-exploration, understanding that knowing oneself is not an act of selfishness, but of health. When a man accepts that pleasure is also self-care, something changes in the way he lives. He regains energy, improves his sleep, and above all, begins to feel present in his own skin again. Redefining sexuality after 60 also means freeing oneself from social rules that dictate how an older man should behave. For a long time, the idea has been transmitted that virility is measured by performance or frequency, but that belongs to a different stage of life. At 60, 70, or even 80 years old, desire expresses itself differently. It can be found in an intimate conversation, in a slow caress, or simply in the feeling of being desired. Excitement becomes more mental, more emotional, and therefore requires time, calm, and openness. One of my patients, a 72-year-old man, once said to me a phrase I will never forget: "Doctor, I no longer aim to prove anything. Now I just want to feel." That phrase summarizes the spirit of this new stage. The body ages, yes, but it also becomes wiser. It learns to listen, to recognize nuances, to enjoy without the pressure of having to perform. True mature sexuality is not measured by intensity, but by authenticity. And when a man achieves this understanding, he not only improves his sexual health, but also his emotional balance and overall well-being. That is why I insist that talking about sexuality and maturity is not a frivolity. It is about health, self-esteem, and a sense of purpose. Every time a man rediscovers his ability to feel pleasure, he regains a part of his identity. It does not matter if he is alone or with a partner. What matters is that he does not give up his right to feel alive. Sexuality, properly understood, is a source of vitality, a way to assert oneself against the passage of time and to reconcile with one's existence. For centuries, society has imposed the idea that upon reaching a certain age, a man should abandon the pursuit of pleasure and withdraw from active sexual life. This cultural mandate has deeply embedded itself in the male psyche, generating guilt and shame at any expression of desire after 50 or 60. The belief has persisted that an older man who still feels desire is somehow immoral or childish, and this has led many men to resign themselves to the supposed inevitability of desexualization. The cultural mistake lies in confusing aging with the loss of the right to pleasure, when in reality sexuality is an aspect of life that can mature, transform, and be enriched over time. This idea of withdrawing from pleasure does not only affect sexual life, but has a profound impact on self-esteem and the perception of one's identity. Men who internalize this mandate feel useless or incomplete, and many end up hiding their desires even from their closest partners. This creates a vicious cycle. The lack of sexual expression reinforces the cultural belief that old age equals impotence, and that same belief reduces the motivation to care for oneself and to stay active, both physically and emotionally. By accepting the premature withdrawal from pleasure, a man also abandons a vital part of his overall well-being. It is essential to understand that sexuality does not have an expiration date. It simply changes the way it manifests. Withdrawing from pleasure is an imposed act, not an inevitable consequence of age. Older men who dare to question this idea discover new forms of intimacy and enjoyment, no longer based on quantity or speed, but on the quality of the experience. The focus shifts from performance to affection, from physical achievement to emotional connection, and from external expectations to internal satisfaction. In this way, sexual life becomes a space for self-discovery, creativity, and strengthening emotional bonds. In clinical practice, many patients confess that for years they have repressed themselves, convinced that their desires were inappropriate or unnecessary. This self-deception, reinforced by culture, has generated frustration, anxiety, and even symptoms of depression. However, those who manage to break the mandate of withdrawing find that their overall well-being improves significantly. Energy increases, emotional vitality strengthens, and the relationship with one's body becomes more harmonious. They discover that pleasure is not a luxury, but a right, an essential component of physical and mental health, and denying it is equivalent to denying a part of themselves. Finally, understanding that retirement or old age does not mean giving up pleasure implies a profound cultural and personal transformation. Questioning these stereotypes opens the door to a fuller life, where desire and intimacy continue to be sources of satisfaction and meaning. Withdrawing from pleasure is a mistake perpetuated by ignorance and social pressure, and overcoming it requires courage, information, and the willingness to reconnect with one's own body without guilt or shame. By doing so, a man discovers that pleasure in maturity is not only possible, but can be richer, more conscious, and more gratifying than at any previous stage of life. Mr. Robert is a 70-year-old man who represents many older men living with a certain confusion and fear regarding their prostate health. For years, he had heard that the prostate shuts down with age and that urinary or sexual problems were inevitable and a sign of irreversible decline. However, Mr. Robert's experience disproves these beliefs. He discovered that his prostate remained active and that with proper care he could maintain sexual and urinary function, albeit in a different way than in youth. This experience demonstrates that aging does not necessarily imply the absolute loss of abilities, but a transformation that requires knowledge, prevention, and conscious attention. Mr. Roberts' story shows how men can continue enjoying sexuality beyond 60, as long as they understand how their body functions and adopt habits that support prostate health. Knowledge is key. Understanding that the prostate is not an organ that suddenly shuts down allows many fears to be demystified and reduces anxiety associated with aging. Mr. Robert underwent regular checkups, incorporated pelvic floor exercises, and maintained a proper diet, which allowed him to preserve a satisfactory level of sexual function and good urinary health. This demonstrates that an active prostate is not an exception, but a real possibility for those who adopt a conscious approach to their well-being. Beyond the physical aspect, Mr. Roberts' experience has a profound emotional impact. Regaining confidence in his body allowed him to reconnect with his desire and improve his relationship with his partner. The sense of impotence that many men experience as they age disappeared when he realized he could maintain sexual function with realistic adjustments and intelligent adaptations. This case reveals that mature sexuality is not measured by the frequency or intensity of encounters, but by the ability to consciously experience pleasure, intimacy, and emotional connection. Mr. Roberts' case also invites reflection on male sexual education throughout life. The lack of clear information about the prostate and how it functions generates unfounded fears and encourages resignation. Mr. Robert learned that talking with his doctor and seeking reliable information allowed him to make informed decisions, take care of his health, and maintain his sexual vitality. His experience is a clear example of how education, prevention, and proactive care can transform the perception of aging and open the door to a full and healthy sexual life. Ultimately, the truth about Mr. Roberts' active prostate reminds us that aging does not mean inactivity or loss of rights over one's own body. On the contrary, it represents an opportunity to explore new forms of intimacy, adapt care, and enjoy sexuality with greater awareness. Mr. Roberts' experience demonstrates that with knowledge, care, and a positive attitude, prostate function can remain active, allowing men to continue experiencing pleasure and well-being for many years, challenging cultural myths that associate age with giving up pleasure. Ejaculation is a complex physiological process involving both physical and neurological aspects, and understanding how it works is key to demystifying many fears associated with male sexuality in later life. Contrary to popular belief, ejaculation is not an isolated act, but the result of coordination between the nervous system, hormones, and pelvic floor muscles. During sexual arousal, nerve signals trigger the release of semen from the prostate and seminal vesicles, while the pelvic muscles generate the force necessary for expulsion. Each component plays a specific role, and any disruption in this chain can affect the sexual experience and perception of pleasure. Stopping ejaculation, whether consciously or due to physical difficulties, produces changes both immediately and over time. The body continues to produce sperm and prostatic secretions, and if they are not regularly expelled, mild discomfort, prostate congestion, or a sense of pressure in the pelvic area can occur. However, it is important to emphasize that stopping ejaculation does not cause serious damage or loss of virility, as some cultural myths suggest. This pause can even be used therapeutically to explore new forms of intimacy, strengthen the pelvic floor, and increase body awareness, allowing older men to rediscover their sexuality with greater control and understanding of their own bodies. The experience of ejaculation and its variations is also linked to hormonal health. Testosterone, the main male hormone, regulates sperm production, sexual desire, and the strength of pelvic muscles during ejaculation. As men age, testosterone levels tend to gradually decrease, which can change the frequency, intensity, and ease of ejaculation. Understanding this allows differences in sexual response to be normalized without guilt or frustration. Adequate information helps older men focus on the quality of pleasure and emotional connection rather than the quantity or speed of sexual activity. Stopping ejaculation also has a direct impact on the perception of orgasm and control of arousal. Many men discover that learning to delay it increases the intensity of pleasure and strengthens the pelvic muscles, contributing to greater sexual endurance and a sense of overall well-being. This learning not only benefits sexuality, but also has positive effects on blood circulation and prostate health, demonstrating that the relationship between ejaculation and vitality is not linear or automatic. but can be managed consciously and healthily. Finally, understanding how ejaculation works and what happens when it is stopped allows older men to approach sexuality with realism and confidence. By knowing the mechanisms involved, they can make informed decisions, practice control techniques, and adapt to the natural changes of aging without resigning themselves or losing pleasure. This understanding transforms the perception of mature sexuality, showing that each stage of life has its own pace, challenges, and opportunities to experience pleasure fully, consciously, and healthily, strengthening both body and mind. In recent decades, science has begun to pay closer attention to the relationship between sexuality, age, and overall men's health. What was once considered a taboo or irrelevant topic for medicine is now recognized as an essential aspect of physical and emotional well-being. Various studies have shown that maintaining an active sexual life, even alone, contributes to hormonal balance, strengthens the immune system, and helps prevent disorders such as depression and anxiety in older age. Researchers at the University of California, for example, have observed that older men who regularly practice self-stimulation maintain more stable testosterone levels and experience a lower incidence of chronic insomnia. Scientific evidence also shows that mature sexuality plays an important role in preserving cognitive functions. In a representative study conducted by the National Institute of Neurosciences in Mexico, men over 65 who maintained sexual activity, both with partners and through self-exploration, demonstrated better short-term memory and greater concentration capacity. The researchers suggested that the release of dopamine during pleasure acts as a natural stimulant for the central nervous system, strengthening circuits related to learning and attention. This finding reinforces the idea that sexuality is not only a physical experience, but also a biological engine of mental vitality. Another relevant area of research is prostate health. According to data from the Comprehensive Urology Center of Buenos Aires, men who ejaculate regularly have a lower risk of developing chronic inflammation or prostate congestion. During ejaculation, prostatic tissue is cleared of accumulated secretions, which promotes local circulation and reduces the possibility of infections. Masturbation, far from being a superficial or shameful act, thus becomes a physiological exercise that maintains reproductive system health and improves urinary function. These findings directly contradict cultural prejudices that associate pleasure with weakness or sin, reaffirming its medical and preventive value. Science has also begun to analyze the emotional and social impact of intimate contact in older men. Studies conducted at the Autonomous University of Barcelona reveal that men who maintain the habit of self-exploration exhibit higher self-esteem, better stress control, and a more positive attitude toward life. Researchers concluded that contact with one's own body stimulates the production of endorphins and oxytocin, hormones directly related to emotional well-being. This explains why many men, when resuming their intimate lives, report a sense of calm, optimism, and renewed confidence, even without significant changes in their environment or lifestyle. In summary, the most recent scientific evidence confirms what clinical experience had already been showing: sexuality in old age is not only possible, but necessary. Maintaining an active connection with the body through pleasure and self-stimulation has positive effects on the physical, mental, and emotional health of older men. These findings invite us to rethink traditional medical paradigms, which for a long time ignored sexuality as part of overall well-being. Science, finally, validates human experience. Desire does not disappear with age. It just needs to be listened to, understood, and approached with respect. Throughout life, many men have received contradictory messages about their sexuality, especially in maturity. Religious teachings, when interpreted rigidly, have conveyed the idea that sexual desire in old age is inappropriate or even sinful, fostering feelings of guilt and shame. These cultural messages have created fertile ground for myths that continue to influence the perception of one's own body. Some men believe that continuing to enjoy sexual pleasure after 60 is a sign of immaturity or lack of spirituality, while others feel pressured to hide any expression of desire. isolating themselves emotionally and disconnecting from their natural vitality. Overcoming these conflicts requires a deep process of reconciliation with one's own body. It means recognizing that sexuality is an intrinsic dimension of human existence and that, far from being incompatible with spirituality or old age, it can be part of a balanced and healthy lifestyle. Experts in psychology and sexology point out that accepting one's own body and the physiological changes of maturity allows men to rebuild self-esteem and reconnect with their most authentic identity. Continuous sexual education and conscious reflection are essential tools for dismantling inherited myths and embracing a pleasure experience that respects personal values without sacrificing physical or emotional well-being. Studies conducted in various contexts show that men who have managed to reconcile their sexuality with their religious beliefs report higher levels of satisfaction and emotional peace. This acceptance does not necessarily mean a radical change of values, but rather the ability to integrate sexuality as a natural and legitimate expression of life. Evidence indicates that those who achieve this balance experience less anxiety, better interpersonal relationships, and a deeper sense of fulfillment. Reconciliation is not only an internal act, but also a gesture of respect toward one's own body, a way to honor the vital energy that accompanies maturity and can be harnessed to enrich quality of life. Breaking the myths also means questioning ideas that perpetuate the disconnect between desire, aging, and pleasure. For centuries, society has promoted the idea that maturity equals renunciation and that sexuality is an exclusive privilege of youth. This reductive view has contributed to making the experiences of older men invisible, generating isolation, frustration, and, in some cases, health problems derived from repression of desire. Reconciliation consists of accepting that pleasure has no expiration date, that it is an inherent human right, and that spirituality, ethics, and sexuality can coexist harmoniously and enrichingly. Ultimately, addressing religious and cultural conflicts allows older men to regain a healthy internal dialogue with their bodies and emotions. Overcoming myths does not mean confronting faith, but reinterpreting teachings to include sexuality as a natural component of life, approached with respect, awareness, and responsibility. Reconciliation opens the door to a full and conscious sexuality, which strengthens physical and emotional health, promotes self-esteem, and restores to men the dignity of recognizing themselves as whole beings, capable of enjoying their vitality even in maturity. Mr. Fernando had always been an active and curious man, with a sharp mind and a passion for learning that did not diminish with age. However, at 68, he began noticing small lapses in memory and some difficulty concentrating, especially on matters related to his sexual life. He sometimes forgot important details of recent conversations and felt that his reaction time was not what it used to be. At first, he thought it was an inevitable part of aging, a natural process everyone had to accept, but he soon realized there was something deeper that deserved attention. The relationship between the brain, hormones, and memory became a central concern, and this led him to seek specialized guidance. During consultations, doctors explained that testosterone and other sex hormones not only influence libido, but also have a direct impact on cognitive function. Testosterone helps maintain neuronal density, supports spatial and verbal memory, and regulates mood, factors essential for keeping the mind active and responsive. With age, levels of these hormones gradually decline, which may explain not only reduced sexual desire, but also certain forgetfulness and the feeling of mental sluggishness. Mr. Fernando understood that his experience was not a sign of weakness or decline, but a biological phenomenon that could be managed and improved with proper habits, cognitive exercises, and in some cases, supervised medical therapies. Mr. Fernando's case clearly illustrates how sexuality and brain function are closely connected. Sexual stimulation and orgasm are not mere physical pleasures. They trigger a cascade of chemical reactions that keep the brain active and promote neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and learn throughout life. Additionally, the interaction between hormones and neurotransmitters has a direct effect on memory and concentration. Recent studies show that men who maintain an active sexual life have a lower risk of cognitive decline, as well as a more stable emotional state. For Mr. Fernando, understanding this relationship was a turning point that allowed him to change his perception of age, sexuality, and mental vitality. From that moment on, Mr. Fernando decided to integrate into his daily routine activities that stimulated both his body and mind. He engaged in physical exercises that promoted circulation and muscle tone, practiced relaxation and meditation techniques to reduce stress, and paid attention to his diet and rest, key factors for optimal hormone production. He also resumed habits that stimulated memory, such as reading, strategy games, and reflective writing. This combination of physical, cognitive, and sexual practices allowed him to reconnect with his body and mind, strengthening self-esteem and reducing anxiety about the loss of abilities. His case demonstrates that age is not an absolute barrier, but a stage in which knowledge of one's own body and conscious attention can generate a surprisingly full quality of life. Mr. Fernando's experience invites reflection on the importance of not separating pleasure from brain care. Understanding that hormones and the brain work together to maintain mental vitality helps break the myths surrounding the inevitable decline of cognitive capacity with age. His story shows that by approaching sexuality as an integral component of health, older men can preserve not only their memory, but also mental clarity, emotional stability, and a general sense of well-being. In this way, Mr. Fernando's case becomes an inspiring example of how information, prevention, and the conscious integration of body and mind can transform the experience of aging, demonstrating that learning, curiosity, and pleasure can continue to drive life at any age. The experience of pleasure in the male body is not limited to physical sensations. It is deeply connected to brain neurochemistry, particularly neurotransmitters like dopamine and oxytocin. Dopamine, known as the motivation and reward neurotransmitter, is activated whenever the brain anticipates or experiences pleasure, whether sexual, emotional, or even from achieving personal goals. This substance not only generates feelings of satisfaction and well-being, but also strengthens memory, attention, and learning capacity. Oxytocin, commonly called the hugging hormone, is released during intimacy and close physical contact, fostering emotional connection, trust, and stress reduction. The interaction of these chemicals keeps the brain active, healthy, and responsive, especially in mature age when external stimuli often decrease. Recent studies have shown that older men who maintain regular and healthy sexual activity exhibit more balanced levels of dopamine and oxytocin, resulting in better cognitive function, emotional stability, and overall vitality. The release of these chemicals not only produces momentary pleasure, but also acts as a biological reinforcement that motivates the body to remain active and alert, improving blood circulation, muscle tone, and mental energy. Additionally, sexual activity generates endorphins, known as the body's natural painkillers, which help combat anxiety, pain, and fatigue. Therefore, maintaining an active sexual life in maturity is not a luxury, but an essential component of overall well-being and the prevention of physical and cognitive decline. The neurochemistry of pleasure also has a significant effect on resilience against stress and depression. Dopamine and oxytocin not only enhance memory and concentration, but also influence emotional regulation, helping older men face the changes of aging with greater calmness. Sexual intimacy, accompanied by affection and communication, becomes a natural mechanism to protect mental health, improve self-esteem, and strengthen emotional bonds, factors that directly impact quality of life. For those who believe that sex loses importance with age, these findings represent a call to culturally rethink the perception of male sexuality, recognizing it as a driver of vitality and well-being. Knowledge of these chemical processes allows older men to consciously reconnect with their bodies, understanding that pleasure is not a whim or an isolated act, but a biological tool that strengthens both brain and body simultaneously. Incorporating habits that favor the release of dopamine and oxytocin, such as sexual activity, affectionate physical contact, laughter, and engaging in satisfying activities, is essential for maintaining overall balance. In this way, the neurochemistry of pleasure not only enhances sexual life, but also boosts memory, mental clarity, and emotional energy, creating a virtuous cycle where body and mind support and enrich each other. Understanding how dopamine and oxytocin influence mental vitality also helps break taboos and myths surrounding male sexuality in old age. Far from being a minor aspect of life, pleasure proves to be a fundamental ally of overall health, capable of preventing isolation, apathy, and cognitive decline. Awareness of these neurochemical processes allows older men to reconnect with desire, enjoy intimacy, and maintain an active relationship with both body and mind. Thus, the neurochemistry of pleasure not only explains what we feel, but also provides concrete tools to improve quality of life and longevity, reminding us that physical and mental well-being are inextricably linked to the experience of pleasure. The decrease in sexual stimulation in maturity not only affects men's intimate lives, but also has direct consequences on cognitive and emotional health. When the frequency or intensity of arousal diminishes, the brain receives fewer reward and pleasure signals, leading to reduced release of neurotransmitters like dopamine and oxytocin. This lack of stimulation can generate feelings of apathy, decreased motivation, and reduced concentration, which are reflected in daily life and social interaction. The absence of regular pleasure leaves the brain with fewer opportunities to reinforce the neural connections that maintain memory and mental agility, a phenomenon that, over time, can accelerate cognitive decline and affect the autonomy of older adults. The impact of this loss of stimulation also manifests in mood and self-perception. Many men experience frustration, low self-esteem, or a sense of premature aging when they notice that their sexual desire is not what it once was. These emotions are not merely psychological, they have a physical component because the brain interprets the reduction in pleasure as a signal of lost vitality and well-being. Furthermore, lack of sexual activity can create a vicious cycle. Less arousal leads to less motivation to seek intimacy, which further reduces brain stimulation and the release of hormones associated with pleasure and affection. This phenomenon demonstrates that male sexuality is not a superficial luxury, but a key element in preserving cognitive function and mental health. Recent studies show that older men who maintain regular sexual activity have a lower risk of cognitive decline, better performance on memory tests, and greater emotional stability. Sexual stimulation acts as exercise for the brain, reinforcing neural networks associated with reward, attention, and emotional regulation. Additionally, sexual desire keeps hormone production active, including testosterone, which plays a fundamental role in motivation, mood, and physical energy. When these stimuli are lost, not only intimate life and pleasure are affected, but also neurological and endocrine processes essential for the overall health of older men. The loss of sexual stimulation can also be linked to reduced social interaction and isolation. Lack of intimacy not only deprives the body of physical pleasure, but also limits emotional connection with others, leading to loneliness and increased vulnerability to stress and anxiety. This combination of factors can contribute to the development of depression and a decrease in quality of life, creating a scenario that extends far beyond the sexual sphere. Therefore, it is crucial to understand that maintaining an active sexual life, even with changes in frequency or intensity, is a key component for preserving mental agility, daily motivation, and emotional health, demonstrating that pleasure in maturity is a silent but powerful ally of overall well-being. Understanding the impact of decreased sexual stimulation allows us to rethink cultural views on aging and male sexuality. It is not merely about satisfying desires, but about maintaining healthy brain function, strengthening memory, preserving learning capacity, and protecting emotional balance. Integrating sexuality as part of body and mind care helps prevent apathy, depression, and social isolation, ensuring that maturity is lived with energy, confidence, and well-being. Recognizing the importance of sexual stimulation in adulthood encourages older men to reconnect with their desire, explore new forms of intimacy, and use pleasure as a tool for cognitive and emotional vitality. Understanding that body and mind are deeply intertwined and that each experience of pleasure contributes to sustaining overall health. Mr. Miguel had always been an active man, with a daily routine of walks and constant social interactions, but as he entered maturity, he began to notice a subtle void that isolated him from his environment. His friends perceived him as quieter and less engaged, and he himself felt a diffuse sadness he could not explain. This invisible depression manifested silently, without the dramatic symptoms usually associated with the condition, and went unnoticed even during routine medical visits. The loss of interest in previously enjoyable activities, decreased libido, and emotional detachment from his partner were early signs of deep emotional deterioration that is not always recognized in older age. Mr. Miguel's case illustrates that depression in older men does not always present with visible tears or complaints. It can manifest as apathy, irritability, or constant fatigue. Often, men internalize their emotions, attributing mood changes to age, loss of physical strength, or daily routine, without linking them to a mental imbalance requiring attention. This type of depression, known as invisible, directly impacts quality of life and can exacerbate other health problems, both physical and cognitive, by reducing motivation to exercise, maintain social relationships, or care for diet and sleep. In Mr. Miguel's case, invisible depression was closely linked to decreased sexual stimulation and the feeling of disconnection from his own body. Reduced desire and sexual activity not only affected his self-esteem, but also impacted hormone production and the release of neurotransmitters associated with happiness, such as serotonin and dopamine. This created a cycle in which the lack of pleasure increased sadness and apathy, while depression further weakened his motivation to seek intimacy or rewarding experiences. The interconnection between mind and body became evident, showing that depression in older age is not merely a psychological issue, but a complex phenomenon requiring an integrated approach. Recent studies on depression in older men confirm that this type of condition is common, but often underdiagnosed. Statistics suggest that a significant portion of the older male population experiences depressive symptoms without receiving adequate treatment, partly due to cultural stigmas associating seeking help with weakness. Mr. Miguel's case illustrates how invisible depression can coexist with daily life without being noticed, affecting relationships, sexual desire, and the ability to enjoy previously pleasurable activities. Recognizing these subtle signs is key to detecting problems early and providing appropriate emotional and therapeutic support, combining medical treatment, psychological guidance, and promotion of healthy habits. Mr. Miguel began a process of reconnecting with his body and emotions through therapy, regular exercise, and the gradual recovery of social and intimate life. His experience shows that invisible depression is not irreversible, but it requires older men to recognize the importance of their emotional well-being and seek support without shame. Mr. Miguel's story invites a rethinking of cultural perceptions of old age, reminding us that persistent sadness, apathy, or loss of interest should not be normalized as an inevitable part of aging, but treated with the same seriousness as any other illness. Comprehensive care that integrates mind, body, and social life can restore vitality, improve cognitive and emotional health, and recover the sense of pleasure and enjoyment that seemed lost, demonstrating that aging can be a fulfilling and conscious stage when the invisible challenges that arise over time are addressed appropriately. Invisible depression in older age, as in Mr. Miguel's case, serves as a reminder that older men need a holistic approach to health, where sexuality, emotional well-being, and connection with one's body are understood as interdependent elements. Mr. Miguel's experience also highlights the importance of breaking cultural silences and taboos that prevent talking about emotions, desire, or sadness, emphasizing that recognizing vulnerability does not diminish dignity, but opens the door to more complete and humane care. Identifying and addressing these symptoms allows men not only to recover joy and the desire to live, but also to strengthen physical and mental health, ensuring that aging is experienced with energy, balance, and personal satisfaction, marking a path toward a full and meaningful life. Mr. Arturo had always considered himself an energetic man, with healthy habits and a well-structured routine, but upon reaching his sixth decade, he began to notice that sleep no longer provided the same restorative feeling as before. Nights became shorter and more fragmented, and although he slept the necessary hours, he woke up fatigued and with difficulty concentrating during the day. This subtle change, which many men simply associate with age, was closely linked to decreased sexual activity and orgasm frequency. In Mr. Arturo's case, the relationship between rest, deep sleep, and orgasm function became evident when analyzing how sleep quality affected his physical and mental well-being. Science shows that regular sexual activity and orgasm experience directly influence the release of hormones such as prolactin and oxytocin, which in turn promote more restorative and balanced sleep. Examining Mr. Arturo's routine revealed that nights with higher sexual activity coincided with more effective recovery during sleep. Orgasms, even in maturity, stimulated muscle relaxation, reduced accumulated stress, and promoted a more regular circadian rhythm. Conversely, prolonged periods of abstinence, which he assumed were normal due to age, coincided with frequent awakenings, daytime drowsiness, and reduced concentration. This link demonstrates that sexual pleasure is not a luxury, but an integral component of overall health, and ignoring it can have direct consequences on energy, mental clarity, and emotional resilience. Mr. Arturo's case also demonstrated how external factors, such as work pressure, family responsibilities, and the fast pace of adult life, can interfere with rest and intimacy, creating a cycle in which lack of sleep decreases libido, and reduced sexual activity, in turn, affects sleep quality. The mind-body connection is profound, and in older men, it becomes more evident because the natural physiological changes of age can amplify the effects of unhealthy habits or chronic sleep deprivation. The function of orgasm, far from being a mere act of pleasure, is revealed as a biological mechanism that promotes physical regeneration, emotional stability, and cognitive strength. When Mr. Arturo began a plan combining adequate sleep, relaxation before bed, and reconnection with his active sexuality, he began to notice significant improvements. He woke up feeling refreshed, his concentration and memory improved, and his mood stabilized, demonstrating how synchrony between sleep and sexual pleasure can restore lost vitality. This case highlights that, for the mature man, caring for orgasmic function and rest is not just a matter of desire, but a strategy of comprehensive health that protects daily energy, strengthens the mind, and helps maintain physical and emotional independence. Mr. Arturo's experience invites reconsideration of cultural stereotypes about aging, challenging the idea that intimacy and pleasure are irrelevant in maturity. His story shows that restorative sleep and sexual function decline are not inevitable, and that, through conscious habits and attention to one's biology, it is possible to maintain a full and satisfying life rhythm. Recognizing the importance of the relationship between orgasm and rest allows older men to regain control over their vitality, self-esteem, and overall well-being, strengthening not only the body, but also the mind and emotional connection with themselves and their partners. Mr. Arturo's case reminds us that the health of older men is holistic and that every aspect of life, from sexuality to sleep quality, affects the other. Understanding this interdependence is crucial for experiencing old age with energy, clarity, and satisfaction, ensuring that later years are not simply a stage of decline, but an opportunity to experience fulfillment, self-care, and a deeper connection with one's body and its needs. Recognizing and valuing the function of orgasm within this framework is essential for ensuring comprehensive health and a life rich in experiences, pleasure, and sustained well-being. Mr. Carlos, a 70-year-old man, had maintained an active life with daily walks and moderate strength exercises, but began to notice small changes that affected his independence and confidence. At first, these changes seemed trivial: slight urinary leakage when laughing, difficulty maintaining the same intensity during certain exercises, and a sense of weakness in the pelvic area that had not been there before. What many men do not know is that the male pelvic floor, a muscular structure that supports the bladder, intestines, and prostate, plays a fundamental role in mobility, strength, and physical autonomy. And its weakening can affect not only sexual health, but overall quality of life. In Mr. Carlos's case, early attention to these signs was crucial for maintaining independence and preventing more serious problems. As he studied his body more closely, Mr. Carlos discovered that specific pelvic floor strengthening exercises could significantly improve urinary control and physical endurance. Regular practice of muscle contractions and relaxations, combined with breathing techniques and body awareness, allowed the muscles to regain tone and elasticity, improving posture, walking stability, and the ability to maintain strength in daily activities such as lifting objects or climbing stairs. This training had not only physical but also psychological implications. Each improvement in body control reinforced his self-esteem and sense of security, reminding him that age was not an absolute obstacle to independence. Mr. Carlos's case also demonstrated that the pelvic floor has a direct role in the sexual health of the mature man. The strength and muscle tone in this region influence erection, ejaculation, and pleasure during sexual activity, and strengthening it allows not only the prolongation of sexual activity, but also improvement in intensity and satisfaction. The connection between muscle function, blood circulation, and nervous response shows that a trained pelvic floor is key to an active and fulfilling sexual life in old age, and neglecting these muscles can lead to loss of confidence, anxiety, and withdrawal from intimacy. Mr. Carlos understood that caring for this area was neither a luxury nor a concern exclusive to the young, but an essential act of self-care that impacts all aspects of life. Mr. Carlos's experience taught that rehabilitation of the male pelvic floor requires consistency and body awareness, and that the results, although gradual, are extraordinarily significant. Improvements in muscle strength and control translate into greater walking stability, lower risk of falls, better posture, and faster recovery after physical exertion. It also strengthens bladder and bowel reflexes, reducing dependence on external aids and promoting daily autonomy. This case shows that attention to the internal muscles of the body can make the difference between an active old age and a stage marked by limitations and frustration. Beyond the physical benefits, Mr. Carlos experienced a shift in his perception of aging. He understood that maintaining independence depended not only on overall strength or cardiovascular health, but also on attention to details often ignored by society, such as pelvic musculature. His story emphasizes that informed self-care, discipline in performing specific exercises, and conscious connection with one's body allow older men to live with autonomy, confidence, and satisfaction, challenging the idea that functional decline is inevitable. Mr. Carlos's example highlights that the male pelvic floor is much more than a discrete anatomical component. It is a pillar for physical freedom, sexuality, and dignity. Integrating strengthening exercises into daily routines and maintaining awareness of this area can prevent future problems, improve quality of life, and ensure that old age is lived with independence and vitality. Mr. Carlos's story invites all men to look beyond age, recognize the importance of every muscle, and value the direct relationship between internal strength, overall well-being, and prolonged autonomy, reminding us that caring for the body ultimately means caring for one's freedom and the ability to fully enjoy life. Mr. Joaquin, a 75-year-old man, lived for decades under the belief that old age implied giving up certain pleasures and the intimate connection with his own body. His daily routine was dominated by family and professional obligations that kept him busy, but, at the same time, distanced him from self-awareness and his physical and emotional well-being. Over time, he began to notice that this disconnection from his own body not only affected his energy and strength, but also his self-esteem, vitality, and ability to enjoy life fully. Recognizing that he had lost touch with his bodily identity was the first step in a profound process of reconnection that would transform his perspective on aging and sexuality. Mr. Joaquin's journey began with small gestures of body awareness. Learning to breathe correctly, Recognizing accumulated tensions in the body and dedicating time to gentle and mindful movements allowed him to rediscover forgotten sensations and reconnect with the musculature that supported his daily well-being. Each stretch, deep breath, and mindfulness practice not only strengthened his body, but also nourished his mind and spirit. This process demonstrated that the relationship with one's body is inseparable from identity and confidence, and that recovering this connection is fundamental for living old age with dignity and pleasure. Mr. Joaquin also faced the emotional dimension of this reconnection. He recalled how, for years, he had repressed desires, ignored signals of pleasure, and neglected physical intimacy, considering it secondary or even inappropriate for his age. By accepting his needs and feelings, he understood that mature sexuality is not only possible, but essential for maintaining mental vitality, emotional stability, and a sense of fulfillment. This recognition allowed him to reconcile with his body, release accumulated tension, and build a kinder, more respectful internal dialogue with himself, understanding that self-care and enjoyment are inseparable acts of personal identity. The reconnection process also included the social and affective dimension. Mr. Joaquin realized that sharing moments of closeness, affection, and conversation with others not only nurtured his relationships, but also reinforced his sense of identity and belonging. Human interaction, combined with body awareness, promoted greater security, self-esteem, and resilience in the face of the challenges of advanced age. This integration of body, mind, and emotions showed that mature masculine identity is built through acceptance, care, and self-valuation, not through isolation or denial of natural desires. Finally, Mr. Joaquin reflected on how old age offers a unique opportunity to deepen self-understanding. Through reconnection with the body, senses, and emotions, he rediscovered not only the capacity to experience pleasure and well-being, but also the inner strength that allows him to live authentically and autonomously. His experience demonstrates that maturity does not mean renouncing but integrating, that masculine identity is enriched by recognizing the importance of every muscle, every impulse, and every emotion, and that conscious body care is a path to freedom, dignity, and fulfillment in all dimensions of life. The conclusion of this exploration of sexuality and masculine identity in maturity leads us to understand that old age is not a period of inevitable losses, but a stage full of possibilities for self-knowledge, dignity, and holistic well-being. The body of an older man, with all its physical and hormonal transformations, remains a valid territory for pleasure, emotional connection, and personal satisfaction. Recognizing this means challenging cultural taboos that have promoted, for decades, the idea that withdrawing from enjoyment or ignoring sexual needs is a sign of maturity. Masculine dignity is strengthened when one accepts one's body as it is and actively seeks to maintain a full, conscious, and healthy life. Self-knowledge emerges as a central axis of holistic health for older men. By understanding how the body, mind, and emotions work, paths are opened for self-reflection and acceptance of one's limitations, but also of the abilities that remain intact or are even strengthened through experience and conscious practice. This awareness allows mature men to make better decisions regarding physical, emotional, and sexual well-being, integrating habits that promote vitality, strength, and mental stability. By taking an active role in managing their health, men not only protect themselves from disease, but also reinforce their self-esteem and sense of identity. Holistic health in older men is not limited to the body. It includes emotional, social, and cognitive dimensions. Maintaining strong, effective bonds, enjoying intimacy and pleasure, and cultivating interests and activities that stimulate the mind are key factors for fulfilling aging. Integrating these aspects with self-care practices, adapted physical exercise, mindful nutrition, and restorative rest creates a framework in which pleasure and vitality do not disappear with age, but transform into more conscious, enriching, and sustainable experiences. Sexuality, far from being a luxury or a forbidden topic, becomes an indicator of health and overall well-being. Reflecting on the cases of men like Mr. Roberto, Mr. Fernando, Mr. Miguel, Mr. Arturo, Mr. Carlos, and Mr. Joaquin shows that each story is a testimony of resilience, adaptation, and learning. Their experiences demonstrate that, even in the face of hormonal changes, physical losses, or cognitive issues, it is possible to maintain dignity and autonomy, provided the importance of caring for the body, accepting emotions, and seeking connection with one's desires and needs is recognized. Old age, then, is not defined by the absence of pleasure, but by the ability to integrate experience, awareness, and responsibility toward oneself in a balanced way. Finally, the conclusion invites a profound shift in cultural and personal perceptions of male aging. By dismantling myths, overcoming medical and religious silences, and embracing sexuality and body care as essential elements of well-being, older men can live with greater fullness and satisfaction. Dignity, self-knowledge, and holistic health become inseparable pillars, showing that maturity is a stage of potential, discovery, and personal enrichment. The ultimate invitation is for every man, when looking at himself, to recognize his right to pleasure, connection, and vitality, understanding that caring for the body and mind is an act of self-love and respect for the life that still lies ahead.